Hello everyone. Today's video will be about the 7 different ways to use and punctuate the word however. So why are we spending so much time on one word? Because the new digital SAT is obsessed with this topic. Nearly every single practice test has at least one question about how to use the word however. The first thing I want to do today is take a look at how not to use the word however. Once you know that, you'll be able to eliminate a few choices automatically. The most common error that students make, both on the SAT and in their writing, which I've seen a lot, is to join two independent clauses with just a comma followed by the word however. You can't do this. I mean, it's basically like a crime. Yeah.
You can't do this. I mean, it's basically.
So let's take a look at my slideshow and see what exactly do I mean by joining two independent clauses with however and a comma beforehand. So I put two examples of something that's incorrect. Let's look at the first one. Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest, comma, however, she did. Another version of this would be Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest, comma, however, comma, she did. They're both wrong. So why are they wrong? Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest. That's an independent clause. Let's look at the second one. She did. That's also an independent clause. I know it doesn't seem like it is because it's so short, but it is. We have a subject, she. We have a verb, did, and there are no subordinating conjunctions. Therefore, she did is an independent clause. And the rule is that you cannot join two independent clauses with just a comma and the word however. Now, the reason why you can't put just a comma there is because essentially you would be creating a run-on sentence. Over the next 7 slides, we're going to take a look together at how you can use the word however. Each slide will have 2 sentences varying in levels of difficulty. The first one will be much easier, and the second one will be written in a more SAT style. The reason why I'm giving you 2 is because sometimes a new concept is much easier to understand when there are fewer words and simpler vocabulary. So let's take a look at method number 1. With method number 1, you join independent clauses by putting a period before however and a comma afterwards. Here is a simple sentence to illustrate this method. Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest, period, however, comma, she did. So Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest is independent clause number 1. Independent clause 2 is she did, and then we're putting a however beforehand. So the SATs will not give you such simple clauses to work with. They're going to give you probably 2 to 3 at a time, and the vocabulary will be much more complex. Let's take a look at an SAT style. 18th century abolitionist journalist Elijah Lovejoy published articles that condemned the evils of slavery and advocated for the emancipation of slaves. He faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life, period. However, comma, he refused to stop writing and continued to publish his works until he was murdered by a pro-slavery mob on November 7th, 1837. By the way, I just learned this fact about Elijah Lovejoy. It's completely true, and I was really excited to incorporate it in today's grammar lesson because I'm always trying to make grammar, which can seem, dry and boring to most, a little bit more interesting. And I thought that this anecdote about Elijah Lovejoy is really inspirational and how courageous he was to stand up for what's right and noble. So taking a look at this sentence again, as you can see, there is one independent clause right before the word however. He faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life. And then the second clause, or the third one, the one immediately afterwards, he refused to stop writing and continued to publish his works until he was murdered by a pro-slavery mob on November 7th, 1837. We can join these two clauses together by putting a period before, however, and then a comma afterwards. Now let's take a look at method number 2. In method number 2, you can just put a semicolon before the word however and a comma after. So essentially you're just swapping out the period from the prior example, putting a semicolon, and then after a semicolon you don't need to capitalize anything unless it's a proper noun or the word I. But however is neither of those, so you don't need to capitalize the however afterwards. Let's take a look at that example, both in the simple style and the SAT style. Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest, semicolon, however, comma, she did. Now let's take a look at the SAT style. 18th century abolitionist journalist Elijah Lovejoy published articles that condemned the evils of slavery and advocated for the emancipation of slaves. He faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life. Semicolon, however, comma, he refused to stop writing and continued to publish his works until he was murdered by a pro-slavery mob on November 7, 1837. In the prior two examples, the word however was used at the beginning of the second clause to introduce an opposing idea. Alternatively, you can put the word however at the end of the second clause. So let's take a look at how that would appear in practice. A simple sentence would be, Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest. She still did, comma, however, period. And the SAT style, 18th century abolitionist journalist Elijah Lovejoy published articles that condemned the evils of slavery and advocated for the emancipation of slaves. He faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life. He refused to stop writing and continued to publish his works, however. Now let's take a look at method number 4. In the instance where you're putting the word however at the end of a second clause, which that second clause is introducing an opposing idea to the one before it, you can put a semicolon after the word however if you're adding yet another clause. I do see this a lot and it can be quite confusing. And we'll look at some SAT style with the multiple choice a little bit later in this video, so definitely stay tuned. But let's take a look at both a simpler sentence and an SAT style sentence to see exactly what I mean. The simple style would be, Alice didn't expect to win the writing contest. She did, comma, however, semicolon. Clearly, she underestimated her abilities. So in this case, the opposing idea is that she did win, though she didn't expect to. The however is put at the end, she did. And then there's another clause afterwards. Clearly she underestimated her abilities. Obviously, you can put a period after the word however and just start a full-blown new sentence.
But that would be so much easier. The SATs doesn't like to be easy.
And this is something that I see very, very often. Now let's take a look at an SAT style sentence. Elijah Lovejoy faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life. He refused to stop writing, comma, however, semicolon. Lovejoy continued to publish his works until he was murdered on November 7th, 1837. Now let's take a look at method number 5. In method number 4, we saw a situation where the second clause, the second of 3, is introducing an opposing idea from the first one. And instead of putting the word however at the beginning of the second clause, we put the word however at the end of the second clause, after the word however, you can either put, we talked about a semicolon or a period. Well, guess what? You can also put a colon, and that is method number 5. So why would you put a colon instead of a semicolon? When you're writing, you can join two independent clauses with a colon only when the second clause is a clarification or example of the prior one. Don't have to worry on the SATs. They're never going to really test you on that because Both are grammatically correct. You can use a semicolon in between two clauses where the second one is providing a clarification for the first one. So don't worry about knowing the difference. I just want you to know that a colon is also a possibility. So let's take a look at two sentences that have this configuration, one that's simple and one that is a little more complex. So the simple style is as follows. Everyone thought that the result of the writing competition would be released on Monday. The judges released the results on Tuesday, however, Alice won first place. So Alice winning first place is a clarification of the prior clause. Who won, right? The judges released results. Who was it? Alice. Now let's take a look at an SAT style. After getting mobbed in Missouri, Elijah Lovejoy relocated to the quote-unquote free state of Illinois, aspiring to publish his abolitionist article in safety. There were numerous attempts against his press and his life there too, however, in total, there were 3 vicious attacks by hordes of pro-slavery Americans. So here, the third clause about the 3 vicious attacks is providing a clarification of the numerous attempts against his life, and that's why you can join those 2 clauses with a colon, putting the word however in it beforehand. All right, let's take a look at method number 6 now. So in method number 5, we saw that the third independent clause was separated from the one before it with a colon, and before the colon there was the word however. After the colon, we had another independent clause. Yet another way is to, after the colon, put a list. So that's yet another way to use the word however. There's like 40 more. No, I'm just kidding. There's only one more after this. So let's take a look at 2 examples. A more simple style is everyone thinks that the prestigious writing contest only has 1 category. There are 3 categories, however, poetry, prose, and essay. So as you can see in this example, the word however is part of the second clause. The second clause is the opposing idea to the first one, but after the word however, there's a colon to introduce a list, the 3 categories mentioned in that second clause. Now let's take a look at the SAT style sentences. After getting attacked in Missouri, Elijah Lovejoy moved to the quote-unquote free state of Illinois, hoping to publish his abolitionist articles in safety. There were 3 attempts against his press and his life there too, however, once in early August 1837, once in late August 1837, and once in November 1837. We made it. We're up to the final way to use the word however, method number 7. The only time you can use the word however and surround it by commas, one before and one after, is to split an independent clause in 2. Not to join 2 independent ones, but to split a clause in 2. So let's take a look at 2 examples, one easier and one more challenging. The community wanted to pass the new law. The mayor, however, did not want to. So as you can see in this example, I underlined the clause. The mayor did not want to is one independent clause. Instead of putting the word however in the beginning of the sentence, we're putting it in the middle of the sentence. And that's the only way you can surround the word however with commas, when it is in the middle of one independent clause. Another way to write this sentence, again, would be the community wanted to pass the new law, period, or semicolon, however, comma, the mayor did not want to. But this is another way to do it. And believe me, I've seen this time and time again on all their practice questions. So it would be worthwhile to memorize this rule as well. Now let's take a look at the SAT style. Lovejoy faced violent opposition, including innumerable attempts to destroy his press and end his life. Lovejoy refused to stop writing, however, and continued to publish his works until he was murdered by a pro-slavery mob on November 7th, 1837. So again, I underlined the independent clause in this example. And what comes after the word however, that's not independent. Just because there's an and, that doesn't mean that it's an independent clause, because after the and, there's no subject repeated. It doesn't say, and Lovejoy continued. If it did, it would be a completely different story. So from and on is not a new independent clause. This is essentially a list of two things that he did. He refused and continued. You see that? So splitting the independent clause is the word however, and then we have commas around it, which is okay in this case. One way to think about it is that in these two examples, the word however is interrupting the flow of the sentence. It's splitting it. It's in the middle. So because it's interrupting that flow, you can just set it aside from the rest of the sentence by surrounding it with commas. All right, let's do some practice questions. There will be 5 in total. All right, question number 1. The corpse flower produces a towering inflorescence that can grow to be up to 10 feet tall. Blank. Its majestic appearance is jarringly betrayed by its putrid scent, which is reminiscent of decaying flesh that can be detected from nearly half a mile away. Pause the video while you're thinking about the answer, and when you are ready, just resume play and I'll go over it with you. The answer is C. You need a semicolon before the word however and a comma afterwards. You could also have a period and then capitalize however and a comma afterwards, but that's not one of the choices. So that's why the answer is C. As you can see, this is joining two independent clauses, and that's why we need like an end punctuation, either the semicolon or the period before the word however. You should have automatically excluded A and B once recognizing that this is joining two independent clauses, because you can't use commas to join independent clauses. The reason why D is incorrect is because with choice D, the word however is connected to the first clause, but we need it to be connected to the second one because it's the second one that's introducing the opposing idea. Let's take a look at question number 2. The planet Venus is roughly the same size and composition as Earth, often leading early science fiction writers to imagine it as a lush tropical paradise. Its dense atmosphere, blank, traps heat so effectively that its surface is hot enough to melt lead. Pause the video, think about the answer, and when you're ready to hear it with its explanation, you can resume. The answer is A. So the second sentence in this series is one independent clause, and the word however is splitting this independent clause. It's coming in the middle of it, and that's why you can surround however with commas, one before and one after. Let's take a look at question number 3. Renaissance alchemists spent their whole lives attempting to transmute lead into gold and discover the elixir of immortality, blank. Their dangerous experiments with toxic compounds likely shortened their lives more effectively than any supposed discovery could have extended them. Once again, pause the video, and when you're ready with the answer in mind, resume play. The answer is B. So we have here two independent clauses. Renaissance alchemists spent their whole lives attempting to transmute lead into gold and discover the elixir of immortality. That's one independent clause. And then everything after the blank is a whole other separate independent clause. The only way to join these two would be to use an ending punctuation before the word however, such as a period or a semicolon. There is no semicolon beforehand. There's only a period, and the only choice with that is choice B. It can't be choices A and D because that's joining two independent clauses with only a comma and the word however, which is a run-on sentence. And choice C is wrong because the word however belongs to the second clause, not the first one. The second clause is the one introducing the opposing idea. Therefore, the word however should be in that clause. Okay, let's take a look at question number 4. Most biological organisms follow a linear path from birth to eventual death. The immortal jellyfish can revert its cells to their earliest colonial stage, blank. This unique ability technically allows the jellyfish to bypass death from old age. Pause the video, and when you're ready to hear the answer and explanation, resume play. The answer is B. So what we have here is the second clause is introducing an opposing idea. Typically, when that happens, the word however goes in the beginning of the second clause, but you can put it at the end. And when you do that, you put a comma before, and then you need an end punctuation after, such as colon, semicolon, or period. In this case, the only one we have is a semicolon afterwards, as in choice B. Choice A is wrong because the opposing idea is in the second sentence, not the third one. And choice A has the word however in the third clause. And then, C and D are wrong because those are types of run-on sentences. Let's take a look at question number 5. The Alaskan wood frog inhabits some of the coldest environments on Earth, where temperatures regularly drop well below freezing. The frog does not migrate or burrow deep underground to stay warm, blank. Instead, it transforms up to 2/3 of its body water into solid ice during the winter. Pause the video, and when you're ready to hear the answer, hit play. The answer is D. So the opposing idea is in the second sentence, where the frog does not migrate or burrow deep underground to stay warm. That's the opposing idea. So the word however belongs in that clause. And then what comes afterwards is yet another independent clause about transforming 2/3 of its body water into solid ice. So we need some form of an ending punctuation, whether that's semicolon, period, or colon. In this case, a colon is the only one that's there, and it is the best one anyways. And so that's why it's choice D. Choice A is incorrect because it has the opposing idea being introduced with the word however in the third clause, but that needs to be in the second clause. And then once again, B and C would create run-on sentences. I just want to say one more thing before we finish today's lesson. The punctuation patterns revolving around the word however are also applicable to many other words, such as consequently, for example, for instance, though, nevertheless, nonetheless. All of these words will follow the exact same punctuation patterns that we just discussed with the word however. I do see the SAT questions on the College Board site asking about these other words. However, they typically focus more on the word however. All right, that's all for today. I hope this video was interesting and informative. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. Next week, we're going to look at the 7,000 ways of using the word frog. Okay, obviously I'm just kidding. All right, I'll see you next time.